Hi everyone, my name is Zeitouni. I'm a senior accounting student at the Honors College, and my thesis was The Lebanese Enigma, the evolution and impact of the Syrian refugee crisis in the context of Lebanon. So in my first chapter, I really asked, how did the Syrian refugee crisis impact Lebanon? And in particular, how were the education and healthcare components impacted? So what I really found was the refugee crisis had a profoundly negative impact in Lebanon on both the Lebanese infrastructure and population and on the refugees themselves. Again, a lot of that is due to a poor infrastructure in Lebanon, but the majority of it is due to just the sheer size of the refugee crisis in Lebanon. So at the height of the crisis, there were 1.5 million Syrian refugees in Lebanon, which accounted for a quarter of the entire Lebanese population. And so to help with this large population size and a lack of wanting to help from the Lebanese government, in fact, a sort of apathy towards the Syrian refugees, non-government organizations, so for example, like Jasur, which is the organization that I worked with, and Save the Children, and even like the Red Cross, UN organizations, they all do a lot of work in Lebanon, especially for education and healthcare. In terms of education, the Lebanese education system is French and English based, while the Syrian system is Arabic based. So a lot of the NGOs, they help to give their Syrian students a foundation in English so they can actually matriculate into the Lebanese public schooling system, which is very difficult for them because, again, the Lebanese schooling system is French and English based. Um, in terms of healthcare, a lot of the NGOs and international organizations, they do vaccination campaigns and primary checkups in the refugee camps. And this helps, again, stop potential outbreaks. In the age of COVID, a lot of this has changed. Schools have been online off and on. And in healthcare, especially like things like vaccination campaigns have been much more infrequent. Um, Also, in my first chapter, I really asked, how did the COVID-19 pandemic, Port of Beirut explosion, and economic turmoil affect Lebanon and its Syrian refugee population? So in that, I found that the COVID-19 pandemic just made a situation that was already bad worse. It again shut down schools, which took away from education of the children, both Lebanese and Syrian. It worsened an already bad economic situation in Lebanon. It increased the likelihood of food insecurity and famine among both Lebanese and Syrian refugees. The Port of Beirut explosion did just about the same thing. Um, the Port of Beirut is the largest shipping hub in Lebanon, and Lebanon imports a lot of food. So this made the chances of food insecurity among Lebanese and Syrian refugees a lot greater. And Syrian refugees were already at a much greater risk for food insecurity before the explosion. So this just already worsened that. In the economic turmoil in Lebanon for the past year and a half, along with the political protests and upheaval, have again thrown a country that's already in chaos into a worsening situation. Um, Now, moving on to my second chapter, I asked, how can storytelling be used as potential therapy for trauma? So I examined what trauma is in post-traumatic stress disorder, how it affects refugees, and how narrative exposure therapy can be used as a treatment for this. So narrative exposure therapy is basically storytelling. So the person who has endured this trauma and who has PTSD continuously talks about their lives via stories, especially where they want to address the traumatic events that have happened in their lives. So for me, I wanted to see how effective this was, especially among refugees, and I found that it's already been used with refugees and it's already been used with refugee children, and it is effective. So I wanted to take this and implement it into my storytelling project that I had already done in the Jahi refugee camp in the summer of 2019, where I taught with Jasur, an NGO that operates a school in the refugee camp. And I implemented this storytelling project where I gave my students full autonomy to write a story about whatever they want. I just taught them how to write a story. So there, each student turned in a story, and part of my thesis, I examined and evaluated some of these stories. In fact, all of these stories, and I included 6 of them into my thesis. Um, as you can read in my thesis, they have such profound they had such a profound impact on me but also these children who are usually around 12 years old to maybe 14, maybe some of them are even younger, some of them are around 10 years old. They're able to talk about such pressing and deep issues such as food insecurity, avenging what happened to them in Syria, their hopes and dreams, their hopes for peace in Syria, war crimes such as landmines, which one of my students spoke about. They talk about such profoundly important subjects. In my third chapter, it includes all the stories of the students at Rahi who wrote their stories, and it really the entire point of that chapter is to make sure that their voices are heard and their voices are exemplified there. So you can go through that website and see each story, the handwritten note itself, and the translation of the story. Thank you so much.